This time, we would ask our panelists to come up on stage and join Ron and myself. The District 230 community is fortunate to have some truly remarkable experts on the topic of supporting teens with decisions related to drugs and alcohol in its midst. We thank each of you for taking time to share your insights and expertise with us this evening. And I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists for you tonight. First and foremost, Andrew High School Guidance Director Brian Nolan. Brian joined the Andrew High School team as Director of Guidance in 2009. Before that, he was Student Activities Director at Niles North High School in Skokie, LT in LaGrange. He coached soccer at his first school, St. Rita, and has coordinated numerous clubs and activities. Brian received his undergraduate degree from NIU and his master's from Concordia. Welcome, Brian. Orland Township Youth and Family Counseling Services Counselor Cheryl Kokaska. Orland Township Youth and Family Services consists of three distinct and necessary components: counseling, community outreach, and prevention youth commission. Clinical staff consists of counselors with master's degrees and state licenses, as well as graduate students in the final stages of their master's level clinical training. The community outreach component of the department keeps it connected and active in the township community. Rosecrans Director of Outreach, Mary Egan. Mary, welcome. I'm very close with Mary as well, and we have a nice partnership with Rosecrans at the radio station. I cannot say enough about their facility, which I have toured and visited. It is wonderful. Mary is a Director of Outreach and a certified alcohol and drug counselor at Rosecrans. She oversees management for the 5 Rosecrans satellite offices in the Chicago area, including Frankfort, Naperville, Oak Park, Lincoln Park, and Northbrook. She also conducts drug and alcohol assessments, performs outreach with individuals, families, schools, hospitals, and other referral services. She speaks to professionals and parents on the topics of drug trends and adolescent addiction, among others. She holds a master's degree from the University of Illinois at Springfield, BS in alcohol education, and a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology from Quincy University. Welcome to Mary. Illinois Alcoholism and Drug Dependence Association Chief Executive Officer Sarah Howe. Welcome, Sarah. She's responsible for state and federal policy and legislative analysis and advocacy efforts on behalf of more than 50 community-based substance abuse prevention, treatment, and recovery support service providers that comprise the group's membership. She joined the association in 2000 from the Denver Public Health Department, where she served as the coordinator of the Denver Alliance on Tobacco and Health. Sarah holds a master's in health promotion with a research emphasis in collegiate peer alcohol abuse prevention from Purdue, and a bachelor's degree in health promotion also from Purdue. She is a proud Stagg High School graduate as well. TASC Executive Vice President and Governor State University Professor Peter Colongo. Peter's Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of Treatment Alternatives for Safe Communities. It's a statewide nonprofit agency that advocates for alternatives to incarceration and community reentry services for people with substance use and mental health disorders. They provide clinical case management services for about 20,000 adults and youth annually. He's developed and led major prevention and treatment programs and organizations throughout his career. He's immediate past chairman of the board of IADDA and one of 12 individuals appointed to the Children's Mental Health Partnership. He also serves as chairman of the advisory board of the Governor State University Addiction Studies and Behavioral Health Department, and holds a faculty appointment as a senior lecturer of addiction studies in the College of Health and Human Services. He earned both of his undergraduate and graduate degrees from St. Mary's University of Minnesota. And we welcome Peter. Psychiatric nurse at Palos Community Hospital, Irene Mulvey. Irene is the clinical nurse leader for behavioral health at Palos. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Nursing for St. Xavier University. Welcome to our panelists, and thank you all for joining us. Okay, tonight I'm going to begin by asking a series of questions and asking you chime in as you see appropriate. We have allotted about 40 minutes for this portion of the program, so let's get started, and please jump in as you feel necessary. First and foremost, what challenges might current adolescents face that their parents did not? And how do your organizations work with parents to bridge that sort of divide? Anybody want to start? Mary, you want to start?
Sure,
Okay.
sure.
I'll put you on the spot because I've known you long.
All right. Well, one of the things, I work for Rosecrans, an addiction treatment center, and one of the things that we see is that drugs and alcohol have changed from maybe when we were parents. Drugs are more potent. Marijuana is more potent. The THC, the active ingredient, is stronger, or there's more of it in marijuana now than 20, 30 years ago. We have drugs like heroin. There are prescription pills that are out there that kids are using. So it's one of the things that has changed in the landscape for kids. I think another thing that has changed for teens today is that there is a pressure to achieve and excel. You know, as parents, we talk about, you know, you need to get good grades, you need to get into the best college. And from our perspective, as you know, in the addiction field, is that sometimes that pressure manifests itself with kids looking for a way out and using drugs and alcohol. So some of the coping mechanisms are a challenge for teens today. Oh.
There you go.
What would any of you say to, I think we heard a little bit about this in Ron's presentation as well, about, well, I'm not going to do it. You know, the lies. How do we even begin to sense a lie? Because I have friends who lie in my face sometimes, I have no idea. Being in the meeting, you deal with that lie. But how do you deal with the lies? How do you find out? You know, that's step one, is finding out.
I mean, look at behavior. You know, people can talk, but you have to look at the behavior too and look at the whole picture. So if some things aren't adding up, you know, somebody might be lying and saying certain things to you, but if it doesn't connect with the behavior, then maybe there's a disconnect and you need to probe a little further.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say was, you know, if something seems off, then go with your gut instinct and keep digging, because that's really the first thing. And if you're noticing, like Mary was saying, the behaviors are a little bit different, maybe the grades aren't what they were at one point, maybe the friends are changing, and that's one of the indicators that we see all the time. Keep digging, asking questions, paying attention to where they're going, asking more, who are the friends, what are you doing, let's talk a little bit more about what you did last night, where you went. Bottom line, if it seems like there's something you're not sure about, then keep checking on it.
Yeah, I think that's really important and true. The whole idea of trusting your gut as parents. So oftentimes we hear something that our son or daughter says and it just doesn't click as to being right. And we get to this point of, well, and there's a part of us that wants to believe him. We want to believe that what he's telling us or she's telling us is true. But when you get that sort of feeling in your gut that suggests that maybe this just isn't true, it's likely to not be true. The other part to that is one of the things that is really critical that we realize and recognize as parents, and I spoke here about 30 years ago to a group of parents, and I gave examples of what was going on with my kids. Well, now I have grandkids that are in high school, and the fact is that there are things that have changed, but there are lots of things that are still the same. And one of the things that is definitely still the same, and the data just keeps repeating itself, and that's that what we say, and Ron, this really came out in your presentation, what we say as parents, what we do as parents, how we behave as parents, what we say as grandparents, what we do as grandparents really matters. The perception that our kids have of how important it is to make good decisions with regard to drug use matters. Ron, as you pointed out, the influence that parents have is dramatic. So I think what I would say to that is that an underscore is please don't ever not recognize how important what you say, what you think, what you believe, and how and what you communicate to your son or daughter is critically important and does make a difference.
Here's a great example, too. When you said this, Ron, it was almost autobiographical. When I was a junior in high school here, there was a boy in our class who committed suicide, and we were a mess. He was in our inner circle of friends. We didn't know what to do. We went to school. My mother said, go see the school social worker, who was Gil Madison, who was still a very good friend of mine to this day. And we had no, I think we said, what does the social worker do? She said, we didn't, I mean, really, we just didn't really, you know, it was almost not taboo, but just, you know, nobody wanted to go to the social worker. So we all, a bunch of us went and knocked on the door, explained what happened the night before. She said, come on in here right now. We all established a trust. We started trusting our teachers. Brian, you probably deal with that a lot too. I mean, there's a whole world of trust that you have to establish as well in getting the kids, I say kids, the students, to trust the teachers and the social workers and the guidance counselors.
Absolutely. We have to make sure that we're out there showing students that we care, that we want to know about them and their good times, and so that when they are having struggles, like you mentioned, they know that they can come down to our office. We want to make sure that counselors, social workers, student assistance coordinators are coaching sports and doing things outside of just the guidance office. The deans are not always there in a punitive way, but they're being seen in the hallways as role models and people that are easily accessible. And human, that we have families, we have lives, we've made mistakes of our own, we're open to talking to students, that their confidentiality really matters to us, that we get where they're coming from. There's not a lot that we've not seen with teenagers, and so just really making sure that they're comfortable to come see us, and then secondly, that when they do come see us, that they're getting reassurances that they did the right thing, that they're being a good friend. Even Ron had an example, you can't tell my friend about this. That a student who's telling is actually being a good friend, even though it feels like they're betraying a trust. And so there's a lot of reinforcement, a lot of dialogue that goes on. I think working through it with students is kind of our motto, to work through it together instead of, well, now that you've come to the adults, here's what we will tell you to do, or here's what we will do, but rather let that start a process to kind of get to a conclusion together on how to move forward.
I think sometimes that's even, the same can be said for parents too. Parents are going through things for the first time too. And so, I used to tell my wife all the time, I said, when my heart breaks, none of the blood gets to my brain. I can't think straight. Here I worked 7 years in a treatment center with 2,000 kids, and now this kid in my house, says this or does that, and I'm like, I'm stuck. So I think that's something we have to recognize too, is that, it's hard being a parent too, and having to sort of put it into action and feeling that uncomfortableness or guesswork of gee, I've never had to confront this, but here I go, and you're diving into the pool and, trusting each other as a parental unit, I think is a big thing too.
Well, how about the fine line between being a parent and being a friend? Because, hey, I want to be a cool parent. I want my kids to think I'm cool and come to me. That's got to be a very difficult line between being the cool parent and being the disciplinarian.
Well, I would suggest, do we have any really cool parents out there? So we all think we're really cool, right? But here's I think the deal is, to strive to be cool as a parent should take a back seat to being a parent. And I know that is not telling you something that you don't know, but the reality is, when your kids hit high school, when your kids hit college, when your kids get out of college, when your kids get married and have their own kids, they won't tell you about how much they appreciated you being cool. They'll talk with you about how much they appreciated the lessons that you taught them. And it really is critical that you don't struggle, we don't struggle, I don't struggle to be a cool dad or a cool grandparent. It's really important to make the line, draw the distinction, and recognize that being cool really isn't nearly as cool as we sometimes think it is. The other thing that you said, Ron, that I think is also really critically important is this whole notion. We talk about drugs. It's important to remember that there's a drug for everything. There's a drug, and that was true many years ago. It's still true today. One of the things about this school district, and you said it, Superintendent, and that's that community home school are very well connected with one another, and the school strives to do that. We're one of the only schools left who has a student assistance program coordinator. That's a really powerful, that makes a really powerful statement. So we as a panel should congratulate you. That's a really, really, really wonderful, wonderful asset to the students here.
We're going to hear from Dr. Gay in a little bit as well. Cheryl, what do you think is the current most pressing issue for adolescents with regard to social and emotional functioning?
You know, I think that social media stands in the way of relationships, very strong interpersonal relationships. I think that our children are using the internet as a way of communicating with people, and they're lacking in the social skills at times of not being able to speak to people face to face. And sometimes it's easier to say things when you don't have a face in front of you than it is when you're on a social media site, whether it be texting or on the internet in whatever capacity they use. There's a lot of things that parents don't know about out there on the internet. I'm learning myself from the kids that come to see me, and it's very interesting to listen to what they have to say about the things that kids say to each other when they're not looking at each other.
I'm always amazed. I was at a Northwestern basketball game last year, and I saw two young kids, probably high school age there, with their parents. They're sitting next to her. You know, they do the joke all the time on sitcoms. They're sitting next to each other texting. And they're turning to each other going, I just wanted to say, this is how you know you're becoming a parent. Put the phone down and talk to each other. You know, I mean, I know there's Facebook, I know there's Instagram, I know there's Snapchat, everything is out there, Twitter. Is that, you know, social media can be a great resource, but can it also help? I mean, in your experience, Ron, do you see this starting to hurt?
Well, you know, the programs, Operation Snowball and the Teen Institute that I oversee, you know, we use social media to put messages out there about those norms, you know, that most teens don't, you know, are not involved in drinking, or we put out information with little factoids about marijuana. So, you know, it's one of those it's one of those things where it's hard to, I think people are very polarized by it. I read an article one time that talked about that people over a certain age who are learning to use social media, they called them immigrants because they had to learn the new language, whereas the children are the natural born. Yeah. And so one of the things it said, if you send an email and then go down to the office and the person you emailed and saying, did you get my email? That's probably a good sign that you're like one of those, you know, that you don't use, or you phone them up and say, did you get my email? So I think that's interesting, but I think relying on it too much, I think certainly people can become sort of immune to it, where even, you know, we have to think about this, you know, MySpace was the thing years ago, and then Facebook was only for college, and then Facebook is now for everybody. Kids got off of MySpace because middle school kids were going on MySpace. So high school, you know, Facebook was only for college, and then it opened up. So now I find that, you know, there's children who want to get off of Facebook because their grandma's on Facebook. How come you didn't friend me? You know what I mean? Like, so, you know, there's this constant moving of platforms. So, you know, I'm hearing Instagram and Twitter are really used more now for messaging back and forth than even Facebook. You know, it has a purpose, but there's this constant shift. And that can cause anxiety, I think, with people who don't use those platforms. But there certainly is a way to get message out and certainly get news out. Right. I get a lot of news just by clicking on the article. Right.
Or WGNradio.com.
A little bit. I was just going to say that.
All right, let's talk about the white elephant in the room, and you touched on this too, Ron. I'm going to a party. I'm gonna drink, but it's okay. I'm not gonna be crazy. It's out there. You know, it's high school. There's parties. There's gonna be a little pot, maybe. There's gonna be a little alcohol. What do you do if you suspect that your child is starting to use? And anybody can jump in with this.
Well, I think there's a continuum. So if there's an early suspicion that maybe your child is in situations, have the conversation. Part of being a parent is having those meaningful conversations about some of these topics, like drugs and alcohol and sex and, bullying and all these kinds of topics. So it's important to maintain that dialogue. I think one of the mistakes as parents we make is that we let's have a talk. And so we sit down with our kid and we talk and we say to our kid, good talk, and we don't really have that dialogue. And so it's important to ask them open-ended questions about what's going on, what do you see, what are you concerned about, so that it's not just us talking. Kids tell us all the time, parents, we just talk at our kids. So if there's a suspicion that something more is going on, it's important to talk to somebody else. There's a disconnect. One of the things, as an analogy, when our kids are small, if they have a fever or a rash, we call the doctor, even though we kind of think we know maybe what's going on, but we seek out a professional opinion because we want to know, what's going on with this fever and this rash. When it comes to drugs and alcohol, we think, oh, kids will be kids, or we think, oh, I had the talk, and they promised they're not going to use, so I believe them. And so I think there's also a stigma maybe that if I seek professional help, maybe me as a parent, I didn't do my job, and I didn't, do the right thing, so I'm embarrassed, or I don't want to reach out to someone. So it's really important to find someone to, ask for professional help and to see what is going on and to have that evaluation is very important.
The other thing that I would say on the flip side of that is you were talking about, it's high school, there's going to be alcohol, there's going to be marijuana, that's just the way it is. And Ron, you touched on this with the Illinois Youth Survey, that's not exactly true. That what we know is that the majority of our kids do not use drugs or alcohol. And I always want to put that in perspective because even our kids want to hear that. Because a lot of times if you ask them, what percentage do you think of the school uses? They'll say, 70% of them. And then you open up the data from their school and they say, well, it's like 20 or 30. Oh, well, good. So it's not just me. And so it's important even in that conversation that it's not just you. And you can be very clear that you as a parent are saying, no, my expectation is that you will not drink. My expectation is that you will not use. And guess what? A lot of your peers aren't either. And that's an important message too.
I mentioned real quickly just about the policies, and I think that's something that the world is different. The days of, the cop just drove me home, those days are over. So expressing to your child, I know it sounds very lectury, but the consequence of someone in the family drinking could have a consequence on the parent. Social host law, is something that's new and different, where adults are being held accountable if something is happening under their roof. That's a whole different thing. That is a consequence. School policies around sports and clubs and activities. I don't know what the policy is here, but I know there's some schools where it's 365. So if they're busted, in the summertime, they lose half a season or what, and discussing sort of like the ripple effect, I call it, of it's not just about what's going to happen that night if the cops come, but what is the ripple effect? And again, your ripple can be, like I said, when I was a kid, my ripple of my dad killing me was the bigger ripple than any other ripple. But I think that's what's important, is talking about some of those rules in the community, in the school, and really helping that person see the pathway and the roadblocks to a potential, decision. Again, that sounds really easy, doesn't it? It's a generalization.
I think consistent with the idea of, and recognizing that the earlier that an adolescent begins using, the more likely they are to develop a problem. So what we've learned after many years of sort of paying attention to this issue, the earlier the onset of use, the more likely they are to develop a problem. And so the converse to that is the earlier that you intervene, the earlier that you have the conversation, the earlier that you have and make an attempt at having the conversation when you get that feeling in your gut that you have to do something. It's really critical to have that conversation, and having that conversation really means, Mary, like you said, asking open-ended questions and spending as much time as you can listening, knowing that a lot of what you're hearing is likely to not be true. I mean, that's unfortunately one of the foregone conclusions that you have to come to, is that you're not going to get a whole lot of accurate information from your son or daughter if they're using, because they're protecting their use, particularly if they sense that they're beginning to develop some sort of problem. The opportunity in this is that as parents, we make an attempt to intervene when we sense that something's going on that needs to be intervened on.
Well, and a good question to ask your kid is, how many of your friends use drugs and alcohol? Because we know that if the peer group is using, chances are your son or daughter is using. So it's kind of a sideways question to ask your child, how many of your friends are using?
And I wouldn't leave the school out of the discussion either. If in these conversations your son or daughter is saying, yeah, I use, maybe it's only on the weekends or whatnot, and I mean, we are with them more than you are typically. And it's not that we're going to walk around in detective outfits and try to get to the bottom of exactly who's using and how we can punish them, but we really do have coaches and advisory teachers and people that are really close with your kids that know what to look for. And if we get a heads up from a parent just saying, hey, I'm a little concerned about my daughter or my son, and I was just kind of hoping for some other set of eyes on him, maybe to talk to him or her a little bit about this. Students are pretty open to talking to those people that they trust, sometimes even more outside of the house, let's say with an athletic team or a club or something like that, than they might be elsewhere. The other thing is that we have their peers, and so they've got 2,000 or more kids around them that are also kind of keeping an eye out, and there's nothing wrong with us talking to their peer groups and saying, hey guys, how's it going? What are you up to this weekend? It kind of helps us know what's going on, but also talk to them about the realities and the dangers and the illegalities of it, but also just kind of stay abreast of what's true and what they're thinking of, and try to catch them early to discourage it, really.
Irene, you probably see a lot of the first stages, I guess, if you will, with the kids being brought directly to the hospital. Do you see a lot of students, and how young are we talking?
Yeah. We admit patients through the emergency room, so pretty much we see a lot of students in the area because we're a community hospital. So a lot of times parents do bring their kids in intoxicated. They don't know what to do because they're not sure what their blood alcohol level is. Sometimes kids do have dangerously high blood alcohol levels. They come in and the parents were home and the kids were upstairs having a sleepover, and they had no idea that the kids were all drinking. And so then the parents are in this predicament. They have to bring the kid to the emergency room, and sometimes they're afraid to bring them in because they think we're going to call DCFS on them. And that's a real concern. They get scared. We've also had parents bring kids in unresponsive from overdoses of heroin, unfortunately. So we do have that. The ER is where the psychiatric department comes down and meets these kids, and we meet with the parents and talk about why are they using, usually is where we start, instead of, we always tell the kids, you're not going to be punished, we're not the police, I think they're afraid to get treatment a lot. So when they do come in for treatment, their first thing is, are you going to tell anyone that I use heroin today? And we always say, no, you're here to get help. We're about getting you well. We're not about punishing you or calling the police or calling your probation officer if that's the case. So a lot of times parents find out through social media if their kid's friend on Instagram or Kik is their other messaging system they use. So we can't see their text messages, so they use Kik messaging. So a lot of parents don't know what that is, and so I have a 14-year-old, so I know what that is.
So what's Kik?
And I'm a cool mom. And I think I'm a cool mom, but, and so Kik is like a messaging system, K-I-K, and all the teens in here are like, no, don't tell her. All right, but it's like a text messaging system, like Facebook, but they just message each other, and Sometimes I like just will do a check-in with my son, let me see your phone. And he's like, no, I don't want you to see what so-and-so said. And so a lot of times these kids are posting that they're high, and maybe they're not, but like they're saying they are, so everyone thinks, oh, this one's doing this. So I think there's a lot of pressure for kids through social media, and my son has said to me, sometimes I just want to turn my phone off, like I'm exhausted trying to message everybody back in these threads, and everyone is asking me, and then I have friends who are saying they're depressed and they want to die. And I'm like, well, if they're posting that, then I'm going to send an ambulance to their house and we're going to bring them to the hospital. So I think talking to your kids about smart social media is super important, because sometimes kids think it's funny, like to post a picture with a bottle of vodka or a beer or a bowl or something, even if they're not using drugs, but just to pose with it, to be funny. I mean, I've seen so many pictures through my nieces, their Facebook and stuff, that I'm like, you need to take these down because you could get in big trouble for this, and so could your parents. And I think it takes away the sting of everything. It's like not so taboo anymore because they see it. Everyone is pot leaf t-shirts and posters, and we've kind of taken the taboo out of doing drugs. So I think that kids think everyone, like you said, they think everyone's doing drugs. And so the kids I do see come into the ER, usually, it is not a lot of kids actually. We mostly treat adults on our unit, but we do a chemical dependency detox program. And usually these kids, the reason they say they use is usually there's something underlying going on. Like they're very depressed, they didn't know how to talk to someone about it. They knew if they did this, they would feel happy. It would be like an instant gratification, and it would make them feel better. So we usually do a lot of just counseling with the parents and try to get the kids in with a therapist or maybe on medication if it's really bad, like their anxiety or depression. But usually, I think doing a check-in with your kids on their mental health weekly, which my kids know, like it's like mental health check-in Monday. I'm like, how is everything going? Are you feeling depressed? Or any of your friends cutting? Or do you have suicidal thoughts? You're not going to give someone suicidal thoughts by asking that question. And a lot of parents say, well, I don't want to ask them that. I want to bring that up. But I always tell them, you're not going to put it in their head. If they were having suicidal thoughts, they already were. You're not going to make them have them. So I think just talking to your kids openly about their emotions will help prevent it.
Those are great points. I mean, think of our parents. I mean, my mom, I came from a big, great family. And, I wasn't too old to get the wooden spoon or smack on the well, she still does that. But I mean, think of our parents, too. You have to be proactive. You have to take their phones and, I'm sorry, kids, students out there, your parents are going to take your phones and look at it. And parents need to realize that's okay to do. I mean, does anybody want to jump in on that? That's right, too, Ron. I mean, your whole presentation was basically that, hey, aside from that great lake shot.
Yeah, well, thank you. So what's your question?
That lake shot. No, parents shouldn't be afraid to be proactive and to get in there and to be nosy and ask the tough questions.
Yeah, it is difficult. Again, I'm not an expert, but I know just in my family, again, my wife has a perspective and I have a perspective, and sometimes, they call it the triangle, the Bermuda Triangle, because my perspective is here, hers is hers, and this kid's over here going, I'm just going to wait for them to figure it out, and they're just going to act as if. So there are times like that. Our youngest wanted to get married freshman year of college. She's with a great guy. They're very faith-based people, way beyond their years, beyond my years. And Nancy's like, I don't know, we should just let them do it because I'm going to lose her. I'm like, Nance, you can't, no. You say, we will not pay for college if you get married. If you get married, you're an adult. And it was very tough. It was a triangle, man. It was a triangle. You should have been there. I wish you would have been there because I needed support. But we're there, and we have this conversation. And we said, you know what? And my wife agreed with me, which was, and we said, you're going to get married? It means you're an adult, and we're not paying for college. And she goes, I thought you guys were supposed to help me. Well, like, we are helping you. How's this helping me? I'm like, well. And it was tough, and you know what, the world didn't collapse, she didn't run away, she didn't leave, there's all stuff, but again, we're dealing, we're talking about my wife and I, our partnership. We're talking about our beliefs, but we're also talking about that we each have our own little, viewpoint. We have our fears, and mine are different than hers, and hers are different than mine, and we have to kind of reach, agreement on that. So it goes back to that whole thing about, you can be friendly, but being a friend, as in like, yeah, I've seen schools like during prom time where parents, have, photographer at the house, they even have like, cocktails for the kids, That's trying to be a friend. That's a parent trying to relive like through their child's eyes. That's trying to be cool. Being friendly, something different. There's, drawing lines. And so I think that's a tough thing sometimes. It's a tough thing. And they push it, and like I said, Elaine, she pulls that triangle. I always look at my wife and just go like this to her. I just go, that's all I have to do now. Here it comes, triangle. And it's tough because it's an emotional pull, and it's hard work. It's hard work to get through that. So, we sort of teach that emotional logic side, and then that emotional side, and then there's that mindfulness of like use your wise mind, like right in the middle. And it takes practice.
So with the end game in mind, we want students to leave here ready to problem solve and to have positive relationships and know what to do when they're, face to face with drugs and alcohol, and we want them to be self-advocates and whatnot. So we all know the end goal. I think that we want that all to happen before high school ends is a little bit, I don't know why we put that on ourselves, because they're not going to be there by the time high school ends, but we see parents that, and they're all well-intentioned, but we'll have freshman parents that will be in meetings that are saying their kids are struggling, let's say academically, and they're saying, well, I'm trying to let him figure it all out on his own because he's in high school now, he's going to sink or swim on his own, that's how he's going to learn his lessons. The reality with that is I wouldn't be in a parent meeting with them if that strategy was working out. So it's kind of like, so how's that working for you? It doesn't work with freshmen. It just doesn't. You need to be on them. You need to get them into good habits. You need to be talking about homework, relationships, social media, all of it. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we'll be with seniors whose parents are emailing the teachers to write letters of recommendation for their children. And teachers come down and say, can they even do this? Like, shouldn't the kid have to come to me and say, would you write me a letter of recommendation? We say, absolutely, like, this is crazy, So those are the ends of the spectrum. I always like to look at it from freshman to senior year as little by little, you're giving them a little more room, a little more responsibility. The risks that they're taking are sometimes risks that you're willing for them to fail. When they say, I know, I've studied, I'm ready for my science test, sometimes you got to step back and say, okay, cool, let's see how you do. If they fail, that's a low-risk situation where they can rebound from. And each student is different. So you got to know, there's some kids that you can give them lots of slack by sophomore year, and they do beautifully. And there's other kids that it seems like the parents have to be on them, and adults have to be on them longer. And if that's what they need, that's what they need. I think it's always interesting to see parents' different approaches. I'm a parent, I don't know what my approach is quite yet. I've tried both sides of that spectrum, and I think maybe somewhere in the middle, maybe.
And kids, talk to your parents too, because they are your biggest advocates. I mean that. Your parents want to see you be the best and succeed and do well in everything. They will talk to you. They will help you. I guess, let me throw out maybe one or two more questions and we'll start wrapping up so you guys can actually have a chance to do some one-on-ones on our commentary with our panelists as well. But how can communities proactively respond to prevent crises related to drugs and alcohol, including working even with local policymakers, going a step above teachers and counselors and social workers? Peter, you want to start with that, or?
I think tonight's a great example of how to do that. Tonight, using the media to promote what you've done, using the media to connect with the very positive things that are happening in the district, to let people know that there are success stories as well. There's often this perception, and I think, Sarah, you were hitting on it a little bit, that there's a high percentage of kids that are using drugs, that are engaged in problematic behaviors. STIs have increased. Well, that's true. There are some of those things that are true, but the fact is there are way more kids that don't have problems, that don't have challenges, that don't have issues, and I think that it's critical to reinforce that. It's important that as a community, we don't get overly focused on the things that are wrong, but get more focused on the things that are right and the things that are favorable, and building from those strengths. But when an intervention needs to happen, you do that intervention, and you engage policymakers, you engage the local support systems and community to ensure that that all happens.
It's really the silent majority. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
How do you
that's
make
right.
that silent majority more vocal and more visible and more celebratory?
Right. So the good thing is, you don't have to do it alone. The bad thing is, you're not doing it alone. So it's not just on your shoulders, but that means, just like you were saying about, they're at school, more hours of the day than they're at home, right? So one of the things that we know from looking at what makes a successful young adult into adulthood is the community. It's cliche, but it takes a village. It is a cliche for a reason, right? It really does. So in terms of community responses, you really, unfortunately, I hate to tell you this, but it's not just parenting your own kids. It's looking at the community around you and making sure that you're okay with the standards. If you know that there's somebody that sells alcohol at the local store, saying that's not acceptable to us. If there's too much alcohol marketing within, from where they walk from school, then really talking about that to the city council. If you're hearing about overdoses and prescription drugs and heroin, like we know we are, talking to your legislators and telling them, you represent me in Springfield, and guess what? This is a problem, and you need to talk about what our larger community statewide response is. The good news is there are environmental research-based strategies that we can employ, like social host laws that Ron was talking about, that we can put into place. But the only way we can do that is if you're talking to those policymakers and telling them, this is what is happening here in my community. And for the youth in the room, we really need you to have those conversations too. Because believe it or not, I walk the halls of Springfield in the Capitol more than I would like. And they can listen to me all the time, but they know I'm paid to talk to them. When a parent and when a youth comes and talks to them and says, in my school, this is a concern, boy, they really listen because they represent you. And we all know what's going on next Tuesday, right? Right? How many of us, honestly, would like to re-audition for our job every 2 to 4 years? But that's what they're doing, and they represent you, and they represent those that are under 18 and don't vote as well. So have those conversations with your city council, your state legislators, your federal legislators. Policymakers aren't just the ones that are called legislators. There's the school board that is here. You want to have those conversations about what the expectations are. That's what makes a real community of excellence. And that's why really District 230 has started that process, which is wonderful to see.
Mary, is there any final thoughts from you at the end?
Yeah, it starts small and it goes to the large level. I would agree, have that conversation with your child, have the conversations with each other, and that's the place to start.
There's a lot of community resources out there that parents aren't aware of, and that's partly why we're here to share with you that there are these resources. We will be out there, and they're going to talk about them a little bit, to come and talk to us about different programs that are out there to help families who may be struggling with some decision-making. Maybe we can help with that as well.
Either of you?
I would just say this week it's fitting because it's Red Ribbon Week here at the school. There's posters on the outside, and we are celebrating, the kids that are making good decisions out there, and there's a lot of them. And so I would just encourage the parents to celebrate with your student at home if they're doing the right things and you think they're staying healthy and they're staying away from bad attitudes, from bad influences.
Yeah, I was just going to say similar. I think it's good to compliment your kids, as silly as it sounds, but compliment them on not getting in trouble and just say, you know what, you got through the first semester of high school and you didn't get in trouble, you didn't do drugs, you didn't drink, I'm very proud of you, and celebrate that with them. Or maybe buy them a game for their Xbox, is what my son actually suggested would be a good prize. If I don't do drugs or drink, can you buy me an Xbox game? Yes, I will, anything.
Yeah.
So I think
Right.
just finding a reward system that works for your family, or if it's an outing or a football or a jersey or something, but find something that works for your kid to say, you know, I appreciate that you're working hard and that you're saying no and that you're not doing this, so,
Pick and choose those battles.
yeah.
Boy, back in my day, we had gum. That was our treat. With sugar. Not the sugar-free kind. How about a huge round of applause for our panelists? Great. Thank you so much. We know how busy you all are. Thank you for being here and sharing your expertise. Thanks to all of you, too. We hope this helped and was a little bit enlightening. And again, our panelists are going to start making their way back toward the common area. And you can do any one-on-one questions that you have. There's some cookies and some lemonade out there as well. So again, thank you very much for everything, for coming. As the panelists exit the stage, it's my honor to now introduce for some closing remarks District's 230 Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Jim Gay, for some concluding remarks. Do you want me to read this whole thing about you? Goes on for a couple of pages. No, you know what? I should read. I do want. Come on, this is cool. You got to read this about you. He attributes much of his his 31-year career began as a teacher and coach. 31 years? Did you start when you were 2?
Someone told me I have a good face for radio.
By the way, how about the hand for the radio star today? This does start with promoting events like this. You hear so much in the news, and I'll be the first to admit this too. My lead all morning was the Waukegan teacher strike and how contentious that meeting was with screaming and yelling. It's nice to actually put Dr. Gay on the radio and have him promote an event like this and get a huge response with emails, and you're showing up tonight. So it's a tribute to you. You did great. Well, here's the radio star himself, Dr. Gay.
Thank you. I have stuff to say about her now. But the truth, I am, along with the board, we're just so happy that we had such a great turnout and a great conversation. And really, as Mr. Nogel said earlier, it does give us great pride to have Andrea here to lead us. So once again, let's thank Andrea for coming. And she this morning they said that did she do anything bad at Andrew when she was there? I said, I'm going to tell the story. And I said, well, it was before my time. But she admitted that she got 1 detention, and it was for parking in the wrong parking spot. And otherwise, she was.
I got 1 detention at Andrew High School, and he said I was a model student, and I really loved everything about high school. But I did get a detention, and it was for illegally parking in the parking lot. You still have to have stickers, right? Or it goes by seniority to park in the parking lot. Well, I was a junior, and I thought they put a big blue sticker on the windshield of my mother's car, so she was not too happy about that. But that was my one, scoff line.
But she is the pride of Andrew and District 230. Once again, thank you so much. But as we conclude this portion, I would really be remiss if I didn't thank some individuals that made this great success. First and foremost, our speakers and our panelists. Please join me once again in thanking them for what we've learned. And they are in the Commons, and please take the time to go see them in the Commons and ask your questions. And even if you just want to take a brochure and ask them later, that's fine, or a handout or a card to share the resources. I'd also like to thank the District 230 School Board for its ongoing support for the social emotional learning initiatives. This board is very, very committed to your sons and daughters in all 3 schools. They want to help our students academically. We're proud, as Mr. Nogel said, of the academic successes of our schools, but also we want your sons and daughters to be healthy when they're with us and as they transition through their 4 years, as Mr. Nolan said, and on to high school and on to college. So the board is very committed. So please join me in thanking, I ask the board members to please stand, our president, Rick Nogel, our vice president, Patrick O'Sullivan, and our members, Melissa Gracias and Kate Murphy-Peterson, who are with us here today, for their dedication to the entire district. I also like to thank our principals for their commitment to our students, Debbie Baker from Sandburg, Eric Olson from Stagg, and our host, Bob Nolte from Andrew High School. I'd like to thank them. Our assistant superintendents do a lot behind the scenes. Our Dr. Dreyer and Dr. Wheaton are with us tonight for thank them for their support of these initiatives. And the administration staff here at Andrew High School, thank them for their hospitality, especially Principal Secretary Mary Bray, Performing Arts Center, Director Lisa Gowan, and our student guides that came in tonight. But also thank each of you in the audience tonight. I know it's difficult to come out on a weekday to come and talk and listen to some of these conversations. But as was said a couple times, the partnership between home and school and community is incredibly important to support our teens. Our staff works incredibly hard between 8 and 3 o'clock to educate and support your sons and daughters. But we're honest, we can't do it alone. It does take a dedicated parents and guardians and aunts and uncles and grandparents and friends and neighbors and community agencies that are out there and here today and organizations to help develop our successful students. And we are fortunate here at District 230, we're very fortunate to be part of a community that cares so deeply to come out and have these conversations. And as stated earlier, our goal is tonight to start an ongoing conversation, an ongoing dialogue. So please take a few minutes to share your thoughts about the program this evening and provide suggestions for future topics that you'd be interested in hearing more about, either as a district or in individual schools. Our schools do an excellent job providing workshops for our parents on a number of topics. One of those opportunities are parent universities they have throughout the school year, this semester and next semester. So your feedback tonight will help us plan for those future events next semester and throughout the year. So please complete the feedback card in your program. Return it to the box outside. We have students waiting anxiously for your information and your suggestions. And the box will be in the Commons as well. So please be sure to indicate the school you're affiliated with, because maybe there's an issue or a conversation you want to have at one of our schools. We want to make sure we are answering your needs to help you. So at this time, again, I ask you to join our speakers and our panelists in the Commons. And I really can't thank you enough for coming out. This has been a vision that we had as a board and as an administration. We had close to 200 parents come out and community members to share and to listen and to help build District 230 even stronger. So once again, thank you so much and have a great night.